Now we're going to be moving to surface area. Now surface area is used a lot. Let's say I look at a prism. Now, by the way, a prism, what it is, and I said prism, there's an S in there. Prism. Now, a prism, what it is basically a 3D shape. So 3D shape that the top and the bottom, it has two bases, the top and the bottom, as long as it's standing up, because if we lay it down, obviously it's not on top and the bottom, but on top of the bottom, it has two bases that are the same, and then everything else are rectangles. The two bases could be any shape, could be a rectangle itself, could be a triangle, could be a pentagon, could be a trapezoid, could be anything we want, but everything else are rectangles. Think of the rooms in your house. Right? Look at the walls. The walls are all rectangles. Now the base is going to be the ceiling and the floor. Like if you look at it in houses, most of the bases are rectangles as well. Right? There's some houses, there's some rooms where the base, you know, right, if you look at the ceiling, is not a rectangle, it's a little bit different. But if you look at the floor, it has the same shape. So rooms are basically some prisms. They're prisms. Now, question number one here, I have a rectangular prism. Now, the first name basically tells me the shape of the base. So I have a rectangular prism. Number two, I have a triangular prism. If you notice, there's two bases, there's two triangles, everything else are rectangles. Again, think of your room, think of a room, ceiling and the floor are the bases, and everything else are rectangles. Question number three, I see there a trapezoidal prism. Now, question number four, we could call that a circular prism, but the name we give it is it's cylinder. So cylinder, it is included with the prisms. Let's take a look at those four. Now, the surface area, we know area, it's basically the area, the what we see, right? Area is what we see. Surface is the area of the outside. As an example, looking at your rooms and you're gonna paint it, like you have a box. Let's say you have a box. It's how much are you gonna paint? You're gonna paint the walls, and in a box, you will also paint the bases. When you call a painter, people call a painter and be like, oh, painter, I need you to paint my room. And pretty sure what they do is they measure the bases. They see as a rectangles if you're going to paint the bases, and then they measure the walls. They break down into different areas, and then they just add everything. So what we're going to be doing here for question number 1 through 4, let me look at the bases. When we're looking at a prism, try looking for a shape that is not a rectangle. Now, if we cannot find a shape that is not a rectangle, then we're looking at a rectangular prism. And then to help you guys out identify the rectangular prism, I'm going to put the 4 90-degree corners of your rectangle. So we see it. Let me highlight it. That's the base. And then we can see here at the front, that's another base. Because I said there were going to be two bases. So it looks like a 10 by 10 rectangle. Right? A squared is a rectangle, so I'm calling it a rectangle. It's a 10 by 10 rectangle. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do my two bases. And I'm going to get the area of each. It's a 10 by 10 rectangle. So we learned that for rectangles, we just multiply the two measurements, 10 times 10. So it happens to be 100. For measurements, kilometer times kilometer is going to be kilometer square. So I'm just looking at the two bases. So worry about the two bases first. And then we're going to worry about the walls. Now, some people call that lateral area, lateral surface area. Lateral, basically the sides. Now, because the base has four sides, I'm going to have four rectangles in the center, four walls. If my base had 10 sides, then I will have to put 10 rectangles in the center. Now, what we're going to be doing for each of the walls, make sure you know the measurement of each side of your base. So I'm looking at this base on the front. This is 10. This is 10. I know this is 10 and this is 10. I'm going to multiply each of those numbers. It happens to be the same value. I'm going to multiply each of those numbers times the distance between the bases. It's usually the height of the room. When we have it in there, is the distance between the bases. And what I tell people sometimes is the numbered, you see a number that has nothing to do with the bases. In this case, 7. So I'm going to multiply 7 times each of these values. And that's how I'm going to get the walls in the center. So 7 times 10 is 70. So number-wise is going to be 70. Measurement-wise, I know kilometer times kilometer is kilometer squared, or people call it square kilometers. So measurement is 70 kilometers squared, or 70 square kilometers. Now the surface area, I'm just going to add everything. I'm going to add my 6 numbers that I see, right? The 2 bases plus the walls in the center. So I'm going to go 100 plus 70 plus 70 plus 70 plus 70 plus 100. I happen to get 480 kilometer square. Now, I don't really want you to worry about the measurements. I don't really want to take points off, because instead of kilometer square, you just wrote kilometers. Or what if it was kilometers and you wrote miles? I don't want to come over and take points off for the measurement. So just worry about the number, 480. Let's take a look at question number 2. Remember I said first look for the 2 bases. I'm looking for 2 shapes that are not rectangles. And I see them right here. Let me highlight them. You see the 2 bases there. So the 2 bases are triangles. Now I'm going to get the area of each of my triangles. I remember that for the area of a triangle, I mentioned before that you have to multiply the 2 numbers that meet at the 90-degree corner, kind of like a rectangle. You have to multiply them out. So I see my 90-degree angle here, and I see it's made by 6 and 8. I'm going to call this 8. You guys see where I got this measurement from. So the 2 numbers that meet at the 90-degree corner are 6 and 8. So I'm going to go 6 times 8. But then I'm going to divide it by 2. Remember, a triangle is half of a rectangle. 6 times 8 gives me a rectangle. Divided by 2 gives me a triangle. So each of my triangles is going to be 24. Right? 6 times 8 divided by 2. Now, because the base has 3 sides, right? The triangle has 3 sides, I'm going to have 3 rectangles in the center. So if I'm building a room and the ceiling and the floor have 3 sides, I only need 3 walls to close the room. Okay. Now, for the areas of each of these numbers, each of these squares, I need to know the values of the 3 sides of the base. And the values are going to be 8, 6, and 10. Then I need to find out what's the distance between the bases, right? Which number has nothing to do with your triangles. In this case, 10. I want to multiply 10 times 6, 10 times 8, and 10 times 10. So I'm going to go 10 times each side of the base. So I'm going to have 60, 80, and 100. Remember, I went 10 times 6, 10 times 8, and 10 times 10. Now, just add everything. 24 plus 60 plus 80 plus 100 plus 24 should give us 288. Okay, not bad. Let's take a look at question number 3. I'm trying to find a shape that is not a rectangle. That's what I tend to do. A shape that is not a rectangle. I see a trapezoid here. And I'm not gonna highlight it, but there's another trapezoid on the back. So I'm gonna say, okay, so the bases are trapezoids. Now I gotta find, right? Last unit, unit 9, we learned how to do the areas of shapes. So we learned how to do the area of a trapezoid. If you need to review, you know the videos are still there. You can go watch my lectures from the previous unit. You need to remember how to do the area of a trapezoid. Okay, so what I did, I see my bases are 4 and 9. On these two sides that are parallel on the trapezoid are 4 and 9. So I remember I told you I'm gonna add those two. So I get 13 times the distance between the bases is 4.3 divided by 2, because I had to cut the height by 2. And that's it. Remember we did that? So 13 is just 13. 4.3 divided by 2. Use a calculator if you need to. 4.3, the half of 4.3 is going to be 2.15. Remember, I even showed you guys a video on that one. Remember when I came and I cut the height in half and I moved the top half to convert it into parallelogram? You guys remember that? Okay. So now I just multiply 13 times 2.15. It's going to give me 27.95. So each of my bases is 27.95. Now, my rectangles in the center, I look at my base. It has 4 sides, right? How many sides does a trapezoid have? 4 sides. So I'm going to have 4 walls in the center. So 4 rectangles. Make sure you know the measurement of each of your sides on the base. So I see one side is 9, the other side is 4. I know this side is 5, and I know this side is 5. I see those slashes there, letting me know they measure the same thing. So I know the 4 sides of my base. Now, which number has nothing to do with your base? In this case, 6. I'm gonna go 6 times each side of the base. So 6 times 5, 6 times 9, 6 times 4, and 6 times 5. So that's gonna give me, let's see, 30. 6 times 9 is 54. 6 times 4 is 24. And 6 times 5 is 30. It doesn't matter which order you go, to be honest. Now, just do them all. Now let me add everything. And I'm gonna get 193.9. I know my instructions. If we read the top, it says round your answers to the nearest 10th if necessary. So nearest 10th, that means 1 decimal place. My answered. I see my work. There were 2 numbers that had 2 decimal places. Don't round your work, round your answered. Okay, now for question number 4, you guys can try this using a soda can if you guys don't trust me. Now, the interesting part is that the shapes in this case are 2 circles, but the centered is just going to be 1 big rectangle. Like I said, you guys can try it out, but just be careful though. Be careful if you guys try at home. If you guys have a cylinder, take off the circles, take off the 2 bases, and then open everything up, and you're going to see it opens up to a big rectangle. Okay, now let me worry about the circles first. I know I need to know the radius. The radius in this case, it's 6. You guys see it there. It's only half of the circle. Now be careful. Sometimes I will give you the radius, which is only up to the center of the circle. Sometimes I will give you the diameter, which is it crosses the entire circle. If I give you the diameter, just make sure you cut it in half because you need the radius. Okay, so in this case, I have the radius, and I remembered the area of a circle is radius squared times pi. So I have 36 times pi. I know we're using 3.14 for pi, so I will have to go 36 times 3.14. Let me not worry about that yet. So each of my circles I know is 36 pi. I'll worry with the multiplying by a pi at the end. Now my rectangle in the center. The interesting part is the distance between the bases is this short side right here. So in this case, 5. The long side of the rectangle, is the distance around the circle. So if you guys were to, like I mentioned earlier, you had a cylinder at home, and then you cut the two circles. So let's say you have a cylinder, you cut the two circles. Now the centered, if you cut it on one side and then open it up, that's where you're going to see the rectangle. But the interesting part is the long distance of the rectangle is the distance around the circle. Now, the distance around the circle, we usually call that circumference. Remember, circumference, the formula of circumference is diameter times pi. Now, if I have the diameter, nice. Diameter times pi. If I'm given the radius, a diameter is basically 2 times the radius times pi. So in my case here, the long side of the rectangle is going to be 12 pi because I went 2 times the radius. So 2 times 6. Okay, now let's see. I have a rectangle where the long side is 12 pi. The short side is 5, and it's a rectangle, so it meets a 90 degrees. So aren't I supposed to multiply those two for the area? What's 5 times 12? Do you know? Yeah, 5 times 12 is 60. So 5 times 12 pi will be 60 pi. Okay, the circles were easy, right? The radius was 6, so 36 pi. Now for the rectangle, just remember what I did. The short side of the rectangle is the distance between the circles. So that's why I did 5. The long side of the rectangle is diameter times pi. So that's where I got the 12 pi. Now, when I multiply those out, it's 60 pi. Now, let me add these numbers. 36 pi plus 60 pi plus 60 plus 36 pi. So I'm just looking at 36 plus 60 plus 36. So I have 132 pi. Okay, but my instruction said use pi as 3.14. So that means I'm gonna estimate this 132 times 3.14, rounded to 1 decimal place. I'm gonna say my answer is about 414.5. So I was dealing with pi's up until the end.